"Can we sleep at your house today?" Twin orc women ask a poor human, and his answer surprises them. There's a specific kind of poverty that smells like rain coming through a roof you can't afford to fix. The kind where you stop noticing the leak in the corner because you've gotten used to putting the bucket there every night. The kind where dinner means deciding which meal to skip so you can eat something resembling food the next day. Everett Cole knew this poverty intimately. It had moved into his bones the same way dampness moves into old wood. Slowly, inevitably, until you can't remember what dry felt like. His house sat at the very edge of Millbrook Village, where the proper houses with their neat thatched roofs gave way to structures that were more creative interpretation of shelter than actual buildings. The door hung slightly crooked. One window had been patched with oiled cloth because glass was a memory from better times. The whole structure leaned just enough to the left that visitors, not that he had visitors, always commented on feeling vaguely seasick inside. Everett was 29 years old and looked 40. That's what poverty does. It ages you in ways that have nothing to do with years and everything to do with the weight of carrying tomorrow's worries on top of today's. He was hunched over his excuse for a table, counting coins that added up to not enough, no matter how many times he recounted them, when he heard something that made his blood turn to winter stream water. Footsteps, heavy ones, the kind that make the ground remember its place. Everett had heard orc footsteps before. Everyone in the border villages had. They had a particular rhythm, purposeful, like walking itself was a kind of conquest, like the earth should be grateful for the attention. He froze, one hand still hovering over his pathetic pile of copper coins. Through the gap in his poorly fitted door, he could see shapes. Green shapes. Large green shapes. 2 of them. His first thought was the thought everyone in the border villages had when orcs appeared. This is how I die. His second thought was more practical. At least dying means I won't have to pay Howell Critch next week. The knock that came was unexpected. Polite almost. 3 measured taps that sounded absurdly civilized coming from what Everett's panicking brain had already decided were his executioners. He stood up slowly, the way you stand when you're not sure your legs remember how to hold you. His hand went to his chest, fingers closing around the rusty key that hung there on its fraying cord. His father's key, the one that didn't open anything anymore. Old habit, touching it when he was scared. The knock came again, still polite, still patient. Everett had 2 choices. Open the door, or hide in his own home like a rabbit in a too shallow burrow. The second option meant they'd know he was a coward. The first option meant they'd know he was a coward who at least had the dignity to face his fear standing up. He opened the door. 2 orc women stood in his excuse for a yard, and Everett's brain made a sound like a cartwheel coming off its axle. They were identical, perfectly, impossibly identical. Same green skin, not the bright green of spring grass, but the deeper green of old forests where the light doesn't quite reach. Same dark hair that fell in thick waves past their armored shoulders. Same intense eyes that looked like they could see through walls if walls were dumb enough to get in their way. Warriors, obviously. Their armor told that story in a language even Everett, who knew nothing about fighting, could read. Leather and metal plates worn smooth in places where they'd taken hits. Weapons that had been used, not just carried. They were also, Everett noticed with the detached clarity that comes with absolute terror, exhausted. The kind of exhausted that goes deeper than muscles. The kind that lives in your eyes. The one on the left, slightly taller maybe, or maybe just standing straighter, spoke first. Human. Her voice had the texture of someone who'd been traveling too long without enough water. Do you speak common tongue? Everett's mouth had apparently forgotten how mouths worked. He managed something that might have been yes if you were feeling charitable about definitions. The second orc, the one on the right, spoke then. Her voice was quieter but somehow carried more weight. We've been walking for 6 days, every village, every town, every house. She paused, and something flickered across her face. Something that looked uncomfortably like shame. Everyone turns us away. We have coin. We can pay. We just need 1 night inside somewhere, away from the rain. Everett looked past them. The sky was doing that thing it does in late autumn where it can't decide if it wants to rain now or rain later, so it just threatens both constantly. Heavy clouds the color of old bruises hung low enough to touch. He looked at the 2 warriors, at their armor that had seen too many roads, at their faces that had seen too many closed doors. Then he looked at his house. His pathetic, leaning, leaking, falling apart house that had exactly one decent blanket and half a loaf of bread that was already planning its career as a brick. The smart thing, the survival thing, would be to say no. Orcs were dangerous. Everyone knew this. Orcs were violent, unpredictable, savage. They were the reason mothers told their children to come inside before dark. They were the monsters in every story that needed monsters. But these two orcs, standing in his weed-choked yard, didn't look like monsters. They looked like people who'd been walking too long and sleeping too little. They looked like they'd learned to expect rejection before they even asked the question. They looked, Everett realized with uncomfortable clarity, exactly like he felt every time he walked through Millbrook Village and watched people pretend not to see him. His hand found the key at his chest again. His father had been a good man, a kind man, the kind who'd helped neighbors even when helping meant having less for himself. Then again, his father had also died poor and broken with nothing to show for his kindness, except a key that didn't open anything. Everett made a decision that definitely wasn't the smart one. The roof leaks, he heard himself say. The door doesn't close right. There's a draft that comes from everywhere and nowhere. I've got half a loaf of bread and some questionable cheese. The floor's not level. One of the windows is cloth, not glass. The whole place smells vaguely like mildew and bad decisions. The two orcs stared at him, waiting for the rejection that always came after the explanation of why rejection was reasonable. But, Everett continued, surprised by his own voice, you can sleep here, if you don't mind sharing space with poverty and its many friends. The silence that followed had weight, the kind of silence that happens when people are recalculating everything they thought they knew about a situation. The shorter orc, the one who'd spoken second, made a sound. It took Everett a moment to recognize it as a laugh, not a big laugh, just a small sound of disbelief. You're... She paused. You're serious. Terrified, Everett corrected. But yes, also serious. The taller one, the protector, Everett was already thinking of her, narrowed her eyes. Why? It was a fair question. Everett wasn't sure he had a fair answer. Because 6 days is a long time to walk, he said finally. And I know what it's like when people pretend not to see you. Something changed in the way they looked at him. Something subtle but significant. The quieter one stepped forward. I'm Raza Grimtooth. This is my sister Kaza. She stopped. Started again. Thank you. We'll pay you. Whatever you... I don't want money, Everett interrupted. The words came out before he could think about them, which was probably good because thinking would have stopped them. I just come inside before the rain starts. Please. Kaza, the protector, looked at her sister. Some kind of conversation happened in that look, the kind twins probably had. Then she looked back at Everett. You're either the bravest human I've met or the most foolish. Definitely the second one, Everett said. But you should come in anyway. They did, and that's when things got interesting. Because two orc warriors entering a house built for one small human creates geometric problems that mathematics wasn't designed to solve. Kaza had to duck to get through the doorway. Not just a little, fully duck, nearly doubling over. Raza followed, equally folded. Once inside, they both straightened up and immediately discovered that Everett's ceiling had opinions about orc height. Your dwelling is... Kaza paused, clearly searching for a diplomatic word. Cozy? Her sister offered. I was going to say challenging. Everett couldn't help it. He laughed. Not a big laugh. His body seemed to have forgotten how those worked sometime around when the last of his family's money disappeared. But a real one. It's small, he said. Feel free to say it. I won't be offended. The house already knows what it is. They stood there in his tiny main room. The only room, really, unless you counted the space behind the curtain where he kept his sleeping mat. And the absurdity of the situation hit all three of them simultaneously. Two trained warriors in full armor, women who'd probably seen more battles than Everett had seen birthdays, standing in the house of a poor human who'd just invited them in because... Why? He still wasn't entirely sure. So, Raza said carefully, the roof leak you mentioned. As if summoned by the words, a drop of water fell from the ceiling and landed directly on Kaza's armored shoulder with a distinctly unimpressive plink. They all looked up, then at each other. That one, Everett confirmed. There are 3 others, but that's the most enthusiastic. Kaza wiped the water off her shoulder. Then, impossibly, she smiled. Not a big smile. Just a slight upturn at the corner of her mouth that suggested she was reconsidering her earlier assessment about bravery versus foolishness. We've slept in worse, she said. Much worse, Raza agreed. Last week we slept in a ditch while it rained. 2 nights ago we slept standing up in a forest because the ground was too muddy. Yesterday we slept under a bridge where something large and unfriendly also wanted to sleep under that bridge. They were doing what warriors do, turning hardship into competition, making suffering sound like achievement. Everett gestured to his table, where his inadequate dinner still sat. I have bread, and cheese that's probably still safe to eat, and water from the well that only tastes slightly like regret. You don't have to feed us, Raza said quickly, too quickly. We have our own provisions. But Everett saw the way her eyes lingered on the bread, the way Kaza's hand moved unconsciously to her belt, where a travel pack hung much lighter than it should. 6 days of rejection, 6 days of walking, 6 days of villages closing doors and shops, suddenly remembering they were closing early and inns mysteriously being full. When you're that hungry, even questionable cheese looks like feast food. There's enough. Everett lied. There wasn't. Not really. But he'd been hungry before. He'd be hungry again. It was practically a hobby at this point. He cut the bread into 3 pieces. The distribution was not even. He gave them larger portions because they were larger people, and that seemed like basic physics. He divided the cheese similarly. Kaza and Raza accepted the food with a reverence that made Everett uncomfortable. It was just bread. Mediocre bread. Bread that had been planning retirement. But they ate it like it was the first kind thing anyone had done for them in a very long time. Maybe it was. They sat on the floor because Everett only had 1 chair and it was being held together by hope and a prayer to a god who'd stopped listening to his prayers years ago. The orcs folded themselves into sitting positions that looked uncomfortable but which they managed with warrior efficiency. So, Everett said, because the silence was starting to feel heavy, 6 days of walking. Where are you going? Kaza and Raza exchanged another one of those twin looks. East, Kaza said finally. Away from the warlands. Away from clan territories. Just away. We're deserters, Raza added quietly. If that matters to you. It should have mattered. Desertion meant dishonor in orc culture. Everett knew that much from merchants' tales and soldiers' gossip. It meant walking away from everything. Family, clan, honor, identity. Does it matter that I'm poor? Everett asked instead. Raza looked at him with those 2 knowing eyes. No. Then it doesn't matter that you're deserters. Kaza's hand moved to something at her neck, a leather cord similar to Everett's, though what hung from hers looked like a carved tooth. You don't know what we've done. You're right, Everett agreed. But I know what you didn't do. You didn't break my door down. You didn't take what you wanted. You knocked, politely, twice. That's... Kaza paused. That's a very low bar for good behavior. I have low bars, Everett said. I find they serve me well. Raza laughed again. That small sound of surprise. You're strange, for a human. You're patient, for deserters who could probably kill me before I finished being scared. Oh, he's funny too, Kaza said to her sister. Unintentionally, Everett added. The best kind. They finished eating. The bread disappeared. The questionable cheese proved itself less questionable than expected. The water from the well tasted like water, which was all anyone could really ask from water. As the last light faded from the window, the real one and the cloth one, Everett showed them where they could sleep. There wasn't much to show. The main room was the sleeping room, was the eating room, was the everything room. I usually sleep behind the curtain, he explained, pointing to the moth-eaten fabric that divided his sleeping space from the rest of the world. You can have the main floor. It's warmer there slightly. We can't take your sleeping space, Raza protested. You're not. I'm giving it to you. There's a difference. Kaza studied him with that warrior's assessment that probably saw every detail. The way his hands shook slightly. The way his clothes hung on him like they were waiting for someone larger to return. The way he touched the key at his chest when he was nervous. Why are you doing this? She asked. Really? Everett thought about lying. Thought about giving some noble reason that would make him sound better than he was. Instead, he told the truth. Because it feels like the first good thing I've done in years. And I need to remember what that feels like. The rain started that night. Of course it did. That's what rain does. It waits for the moment of maximum inconvenience and then starts with enthusiasm. The 4 leaks in Everett's roof each performed their unique symphony. The enthusiastic one by the east wall went plink, plink, plink with metronomic consistency. The one by the west wall did a slower plonk, plonk, plonk. The two by the north wall harmonized in a way that suggested they'd been practicing. Everett lay on his sleeping mat behind the curtain, listening to the rain and the sounds of two orc warriors trying to arrange themselves comfortably in a space designed for someone substantially smaller. "Your foot is on my back," he heard Kaza mutter. "Your elbow is in my face," Raza countered. "That's because there's no room for elbows. There's no room for anything, including us." A pause. "Then, he has nothing," Raza said softly. "Did you see? He gave us most of his food. That was probably supposed to last him days." "I saw. Why would he do that?" Kaza's answer was quiet enough that Everett almost missed it. "Maybe for the same reason we knocked instead of taking. Maybe there are still some people trying to be more than what the world tells them to be." Everett stared at the ceiling, his leaking, inadequate ceiling, and felt something strange in his chest. Not quite hope. Hope was too big. But maybe hope's smaller cousin. The one that whispers, maybe things can be different, instead of screaming it. He touched the key at his chest. His father's key that opened nothing. Or maybe it did open something, just not doors. Morning came with the subtlety of someone who knows they're interrupting something important but doesn't care. Gray light filtered through the cloth window and the real window with equal lack of enthusiasm. Everett woke to voices, quiet ones, trying not to wake him, which was thoughtful but pointless, since three people in a space designed for one meant privacy was more theoretical than actual. "We should leave now," Kaza was saying. "Before the village wakes up. If people see us here, they'll make it worse for him." Raza finished. "Yes, I know." Everett pushed aside the curtain. Both orcs looked at him with identical expressions of being caught mid-conspiracy. "I'm awake," he said unnecessarily. "You don't have to whisper." "We were just," Raza started. "Planning to leave before you're seen with me. I know, it's fine, it's actually smart. But it wasn't fine, and they all knew it." Kaza stood up, her head nearly brushing the ceiling. "Thank you. For last night. For," she gestured vaguely at everything. "For being different." Raza stood too. She reached for her coin pouch. "Please," Everett said quickly. "Don't. I don't want payment. I don't want—" He stopped. Started again. "Just keep walking. Find your way. Whatever that means. That's payment enough." They looked at each other. That twin communication again. "We could stay," Raza said suddenly. "For a few days. Help fix the roof, the leaks. We're good with—" "No," Everett interrupted. "You can't. People are already suspicious of me. If they see orcs here—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. They understood the math of prejudice and poverty. Kaza's jaw tightened. "Then we go now, while it's still dark enough for people to pretend they didn't see." They gathered their things, the armor they'd removed to sleep, the weapons they'd placed carefully by the door, the travel packs that still hung too light. At the door, Raza paused. She pulled something from her pack, a small wrapped bundle. "We don't have much, but this is good travel bread. Real bread. The kind that doesn't get hard. Keep it, please." Everett took it. Not because he wanted to, but because refusing would have hurt more than accepting. Kaza stepped outside first, checking the pre-dawn darkness with warrior caution. Raza followed. They were almost to the edge of his pathetic yard when Everett called out, "Wait!" They turned. Everett's hand went to the key at his chest. He pulled the cord over his head, the frayed cord that had been his father's, that had been his only inheritance besides debt and disappointment. "My father told me this key opened something important once," he said. "I've been carrying it for years, trying to remember what that was. Last night I figured it out." He held it out to Kaza, the rusty metal catching the first hints of dawn light. "It doesn't open doors. It opens the choice to be different than you're supposed to be. I think you need it more than I do." Kaza stared at the key. At him. "I can't." "You can. You're walking away from everything you knew to be something different. That's harder than anything I've ever done. Take it. Remember that even rusty keys that don't open doors can mean something." Raza's eyes were suspiciously bright. She nudged her sister. Kaza took the key. Her large hand, scarred, calloused, built for weapons, closed around it with surprising gentleness. "Blood doesn't make you family," she said softly. "But kindness does. We won't forget this." They left. Two orc warriors walking into the pre-dawn darkness, heading east, heading away, heading toward whatever their away meant. Everett watched them go until they disappeared into the forest path. Then he turned back to his small, leaning, leaking house, to his empty food stores and his hopeless debts. and his impossible future. But he didn't feel quite as heavy as he had yesterday. Maybe that was worth the price of half a loaf of bread and a key that didn't open anything. Maybe that was worth everything. 3 days later, Howell Critch knocked on Everett's door with the enthusiasm of someone who enjoys other people's misery professionally. Howell was exactly the kind of man who becomes a debt collector, thin in a way that suggested his body disapproved of his life choices, with a perpetual expression like he'd just tasted something disappointing. He carried his leather-bound ledger book everywhere, running his finger down columns of numbers with the reverence other men reserved for holy texts. "Everett Cole," he announced, as if Everett might have forgotten his own name. "Rent is due, plus last month's unpaid portion, plus interest on said portion. The Lord Pemberton expects full payment by week's end." Everett looked at the coins spread on his table. They still spelled "not enough" in every language that mattered. "I don't have it," he said. Simple truth, the only kind he had left. Howell made a show of consulting his book, though they both knew he'd memorized every debt in the village. "That's unfortunate, because Lord Pemberton has been very patient indeed." He ran his finger down the page, counting moedas with his lips moving slightly. 3 months behind. At this rate, you'll be owing more than the house is worth." "The house isn't worth anything," Everett pointed out. "Exactly." Howell smiled the smile of someone who'd been waiting to make that exact point. "Which means next month, when you still can't pay, Lord Pemberton will have to exercise his right to reclaim the property and discharge the debt through other means." Other means meant debtor's service, meant working Lord Pemberton's fields until the debt was paid, which, given how Lord Pemberton calculated interest, meant forever. "I'll find a way," Everett said, knowing it was a lie. "Yes," Howell agreed, knowing it was a lie. "I'm sure you will." He was halfway to the door when he paused, his eyes catching on something, or rather, the absence of something. "Didn't you used to wear a key? On a cord?" Everett's hand went to his chest automatically, found nothing. "I gave it away." "Gave it?" Howell's tone suggested this was somehow more offensive than being poor. "To whom?" "Someone who needed it more than I did." Howell made a note in his book. The scratch of pen on paper sounded like judgment. Fascinating. A man who can't pay his debts giving away possessions. Lord Pemberton will find that very interesting. It was just a key, a rusty key that didn't open anything. Then perhaps you should have sold it. Howell tucked his book away with finality. "Week's end, Mr. Cole. Find the money or find yourself finding new accommodations, preferably ones that don't leak quite so enthusiastically." He left. The door swung crooked in his wake, letting in a draft that smelled like autumn giving up on hope. Everett sat down at his table, looked at his insufficient coins, looked at his leaking ceiling, looked at the space where 2 orc warriors had slept 3 nights ago. He thought about his father, about the key, about choices that don't make sense but feel right anyway. Then he stood up, because sitting wouldn't solve anything, and at least standing made him feel like he was doing something, even if that something was just vertical surrender. That's when he heard it again. Footsteps, heavy ones, the kind that make the ground remember. His heart did something complicated between hope and terror. 2 figures emerged from the forest path. Green figures. Large green figures. Walking with purpose toward his pathetic house at the edge of the village. Kaza and Raza. But they weren't alone. Behind them came more orcs. 4 of them. Older by the look of them. The kind of old that comes with scars that tell stories. Everett's brain made interesting interpretive choices about what this meant. Most of them involved him becoming very dead very quickly. But then Kaza saw him standing in his doorway and she smiled, fully smiled. "Everett Cole," she called out. "We have a problem." "Several problems," Raza added. "You're going to hate us." They reached his yard, all 6 orcs, turning his sad little property into what probably looked like an invasion to anyone watching from the village. "We tried to leave," Kaza explained. "We walked for 2 days east, made it almost to the trading roads. And we couldn't stop thinking about this house," Raza continued. "About how the roof leaks, how the door doesn't close right, how you gave us your food and your key and asked for nothing." One of the older orcs stepped forward, a female with gray threading through her hair, and a face that had seen enough to stop being impressed by most things. "I'm Nexara, formerly of the Stonefist clan, now of no clan." She gestured to the others. "We're all deserters, all walking east, all trying to find our way." Another orc, Male, younger than Nexara but older than the twins, with a scar that bisected his face in a way that suggested it had opinions, spoke up. The problem is, we're builders, stonemasons, before we were warriors. And we can't, Kaza paused, we can't just leave it. This house, it would drive us mad. So we came back, Raza finished, to fix your roof, if you'll let us. Everett stared at them, at 6 orc deserters standing in his yard at dawn, offering to fix a house that wasn't worth fixing in a village that would hate them for being here. You can't, he said. The village will see orcs working, Nexara interrupted. Yes, they'll see that, and they'll talk, and they'll judge, and they'll probably make it worse for you. Definitely make it worse for you, the scarred orc agreed. So we understand if you say no, Kaza added. We do, but we had to ask. Everett looked at his house, at the roof that leaked in 4 places, at the door that hung crooked, at all the small ways poverty had convinced him to stop trying. Then he looked at 6 orcs who'd walked away from everything they knew, heading toward an away they couldn't name, but who stopped in the middle of that journey because a leaking roof bothered them. He thought about his father, about kindness being more expensive than money, about keys that opened choices instead of doors. One condition, he said. They waited. You fix it, Everett continued, but you let me help. I may not know how to fix a roof, but I can learn. This is still my house, even if it's a disaster. Nexara grinned. It was the kind of grin that suggested she'd been hoping he'd say exactly that. Deal. But warning, we're going to fix more than the roof. Doors coming off its hinges. Windows need actual glass. Floor should probably be level. We're excessive when we start fixing things. We have a problem, the scarred orc added. We're perfectionists. It's very annoying. Another orc, quiet until now, chimed in. Everett found himself laughing. Actually laughing. The kind of laugh that comes from absurdity colliding with hope and neither one being sure who wins. When do we start? He asked. Now, all 6 orcs said simultaneously. And they did. The next week was possibly the strangest week of Everett's life, and he'd had some strange weeks. 6 orcs descended on his small, inadequate house with the kind of focused intensity usually reserved for military operations. They treated the repairs like a campaign. Nexara took charge of the roof, climbing up to assess the damage with the confidence of someone who'd climbed worse. This isn't a roof, she announced. This is optimism with thatch on top. But we can work with optimism. The scarred orc, whose name was Vulcus and who indeed whistled slightly when he talked due to his wooden replacement tooth, handled the door. A door should close, he declared as if this was revolutionary thinking. Revolutionary, I know. But trust me on this. Kaza and Raza tackled the windows, somehow procuring real glass from a traveling merchant who took one look at 2 large orc women asking very politely about window supplies and decided that yes, today was a great day to be cooperative. The other 2 orcs, brothers named Dern and Rask, worked on the floor with mathematical precision that suggested they'd spent previous lives making things very straight and very level. And Everett? Everett learned. He learned how to patch a roof properly, how to set a door so it hung true, how to mix mortar that would actually hold stones together instead of just suggesting they might consider staying in place. He learned orc curse words, many orc curse words, most of which were surprisingly creative. He learned that Nexara had left her clan when they'd ordered her to kill human prisoners. They were farmers, she'd said, while teaching him how to weave thatch. Young ones. Barely knew which end of a spear was which. I couldn't do it, so I walked away. He learned that Vulcus had been a scout who'd watched his unit burn a human village. The orders came from up high. Said these humans had killed orc civilians. Maybe they had. But I saw children in that village. Can't unknow that. Can't serve after that. He learned that Dern and Rask had deserted together after being ordered to execute their younger sister for falling in love with a human. They said she dishonored the clan, Dern explained while straightening floorboards. We said the clan could go rot. Took her east, found her a safe place, then kept walking because you can't go back from that. They all had stories. They'd all reached a point where following orders meant betraying something deeper than duty. And the village noticed. Of course the village noticed. Hard to miss 6 orcs hammering and sawing and fixing at the edge of town. Beatrice Wren, Everett's neighbor, elderly guardian of gossip and disapproval, appeared on day 2 with her rosary and her judgment. Everett Cole, what in the saints' names are you doing? Fixing my house. Everett replied, currently holding a board while Kaza measured it. With orcs? They're good at fixing things. They're orcs. As if saying it louder made it more of an argument. Kaza didn't even look up from her measuring. We're also very good at hearing. Excellent hearing. Unnaturally good, some might say. Beatrice's fingers worked her rosary beads faster. This is unnatural. Improper. Dangerous. The house being held together with hope and prayer was dangerous, Everett countered. This is actually the safer option. She huffed away, beads clicking, to no doubt inform the entire village that Everett Cole had finally lost what little mind poverty had left him. But others came too. Curious ones, suspicious ones, angry ones. Howell Critch arrived on day 4, his book clutched like a shield. Lord Pemberton has been informed of your activities. He's very concerned. About my roof repairs? Everett asked innocently. About your associates. Howell's eyes skimmed the orcs working. Lord Pemberton wants to ensure there's no threat to the village. Vulcus stopped working on the door, turned slowly. The wooden tooth whistled slightly when he spoke. We're fixing a roof. If Lord Pemberton considers carpentry threatening, perhaps Lord Pemberton needs different concerns. Howell's face did complicated things. I'll be sure to convey your message. I'm certain he'll find it very interesting. But on day 5, something changed. A child appeared. Small boy, maybe 6 years old, standing at the edge of the property with wide eyes and wider curiosity. Are you really orcs? He asked Raza, who was currently covered in sawdust and looking like a forest spirit who'd lost an argument with a tree. Really, truly, Raza confirmed. Are you going to eat us? Not today. We already ate. Had some nice bread. Very filling. Do you really have magic? No magic, just hammers and determination. The boy considered this. My house has a leak too. Raza paused, looked at the boy, at his patched clothes and too-thin frame, at his house visible down the row, another structure held together by poverty's creative engineering. We'll look at it when we finish here, she said, if your parents say it's okay. The boy ran off, came back 10 minutes later with his mother, a young woman with the same tired eyes Everett saw in his own reflection. I'm sorry, she said immediately. He shouldn't bother you. I told him. No bother, Nexara called from the roof. Your boy says you have a leak? We have 3 leaks, but I can't pay. We barely have. Did we ask for payment? Nexara interrupted. We're already out here, already have tools. Roofs don't care about species. They just care about not leaking. The woman stared. You'd fix our roof? After we finish this one. Give us 2 days. More children appeared over the next days. Then more parents. The poorest ones. The ones living at the village edges with Everett in the territory of barely getting by. By day 6, Dern had a list. An actual list of repairs. 7 houses, he announced. All with leaks or broken doors or floors that gave up on being level. All too poor to hire help. We could stay another week, Rask suggested carefully. Fix them, if Everett doesn't mind us being here. All 6 orcs looked at Everett. He should have said no. The smart thing was to say no. Every extra day the orcs stayed was another day of judgment from the village, another mark against him in Howell Critch's Book of Sins. But he thought about the boy with the wide eyes, about his mother with the tired ones, about 7 houses where people chose between fixing leaks and eating. He thought about his father's key, now hanging around Kaza's neck, catching light when she moved. Stay, he said. Help them. That's what the key means, isn't it? Choosing to be different than you're supposed to be. Kaza touched the key at her chest, smiled. Told you he was different. Dangerously different. Her sister agreed. They stayed, and they fixed 7 more houses, and the village couldn't decide if it was outraged or impressed. But the poorest edges of Millbrook, the part where Everett and others like him lived, those people stopped seeing orcs. They started seeing the people with hammers who asked for nothing and gave everything. On day 12, Howell Critch returned. But this time, he wasn't alone. Lord Pemberton himself appeared, a man who wore wealth like armor and contempt like comfortable clothes. He rode a horse that cost more than Everett's house was worth, even with all the improvements. Everett Cole, Lord Pemberton announced from horseback, because apparently dismounting was too egalitarian. I've been patient, very patient, but this situation has become untenable. The 6 orcs stopped working, arranged themselves in a formation that wasn't quite threatening, but definitely wasn't friendly. The rent is still due. Lord Pemberton continued. Plus interest, plus fees for allowing these creatures to remain on property I technically own. I calculate you now owe approximately 3 times what you owed last week. 3 times? Everett's voice cracked. That's not fair. Lord Pemberton smiled. Neither is harboring orcs. Neither is creating village unrest. Neither is showing poor judgment repeatedly and without repentance. They're fixing houses, Everett protested. Helping people who also owe me rent, Lord Pemberton interrupted. People who now think they can rely on charity instead of payment. You've created a very expensive problem, Mr. Cole. Kaza stepped forward. What do you want? Excuse me? You didn't ride out here for a conversation, Kaza continued. You want something. What is it? Lord Pemberton's horse shifted uneasily, picking up on its rider's discomfort at being read so accurately. I want, he said carefully, what I'm owed, plus assurance that these repairs will be made right. Professional quality, not orc quality. Orc quality, Nexara said from the roof, her voice sharp enough to cut, is why this house will stand for 50 years instead of falling down next winter. Nevertheless, how much? Raza interrupted. For Everett's debt. Total. What's the number? Howell Critch consulted his book with obvious pleasure. 47 gold pieces, plus interest accumulating daily. It was an impossible number. The kind of number that bends reality around it. The orcs looked at each other. That communication that happened in glances and small gestures. Then Vulcus reached into his travel pack. We have it, he said simply. Everyone froze. We're deserters, Vulcus continued, pulling out a heavy coin pouch. But we're not thieves. We took our pay when we left. Everything we'd earned, everything the clans owed us for years of service. We were saving it, for our away, for whatever that meant. Dern pulled out another pouch. We were going to buy land, somewhere east, start over. Build something, Rask added, producing his own coins. A place where deserters could live without judgment. One by one, all 6 orcs contributed. Pouches emptied onto Everett's newly level floor. 47 gold pieces. Exactly. Lord Pemberton stared. Howell Critch's book dangled forgotten from his hand. Take it, Kaza said. Clear Everett's debt, all of it, forever. I can't, Everett started. You gave us a roof when everyone else gave us doors, Raza interrupted. You gave us your food when you had none. You gave Kaza your father's key because you thought it meant something. She looked at him with those 2 knowing eyes. This is us giving it back. Different form, same meaning. But your land, Everett protested. You're away. We found it, Nexara said simply. Right here, in this village edge. Among people who need houses fixed and don't have gold to pay for it. This can be our away, Kaza added. If you'll have us. Lord Pemberton cleared his throat. This is highly irregular. Take the money, Vulcus suggested, his wooden tooth whistling ominously. Or we'll stay here and fix every poor person's house in your territory until you have no one left to exploit. Lord Pemberton's face cycled through several interesting colors, but he took the money, because 47 gold pieces was 47 gold pieces, and exploitation becomes harder when people's houses stop leaking. The debt is cleared, he announced with as much dignity as someone accepting defeat could manage. The property is yours, Mr. Cole, free and clear. He paused. Though the village council will want to discuss your tenants. They're not tenants, Everett said. They're family. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. The first time the word family meant something other than the absence of people who used to be there. Lord Pemberton rode away. Howell Critch followed, his book somehow looking lighter now that it had 1 less debt to carry. The 6 orcs and 1 human stood in the yard of a house that no longer leaked, looking at each other in the aftermath of impossible kindness. So, Everett said into the silence, anyone want to help me add rooms? Because if you're staying, we're going to need more space. Dangerously practical, Raza observed. It's what we like about him. Her sister agreed. They built 3 more rooms onto the house over the next month. They fixed 17 more leaking roofs in the village edges. They started a small workshop where they took on carpentry jobs for people who couldn't afford regular craftsmen. They became, impossibly, a fixture. The orcs at the village edge who fixed things. Beatrice Wren never did approve. She continued passing her rosary beads and disapproving loudly and frequently. But she also, and she would deny this vehemently, quietly asked Dern to look at her front step, which had rotted through. He fixed it, for free, because that's what they did now. The village slowly, reluctantly adjusted to having orcs who were just there, working, building, living. Not all accepted it. Some never would. Prejudice doesn't die. It just learns to grumble quieter. But the poorest people in Millbrook, the ones at the edges, they understood. When you're drowning, you don't ask about the species of the hand pulling you up. 6 months after 2 orc warriors knocked on a poor human's door, Everett stood in his now actually sturdy house and looked at the family that had built itself from broken pieces. Nixara was teaching him advanced masonry. "You have terrible form," she'd say daily, "but you're learning, slowly, so slowly, like watching stone erode." Vulcus had fixed the whistling in his wooden tooth, but kept it anyway because he liked the character it gave his voice. Dern and Rask had started taking on apprentices, village children from the poor edges who wanted to learn carpentry, but whose families couldn't afford proper training, and Kaza and Raza. They'd hung Everett's father's key over the main door of the expanded house. Above it they'd carved words in both common tongue and Orcish. Blood makes you family, choice makes you home. It wasn't a perfect life. Perfect lives didn't exist anywhere except in stories people told to comfort themselves. Everett still had hard days. Days when he counted coins and felt the old familiar weight. Days when he saw his reflection and remembered what alone felt like. The orcs still faced suspicion, still heard whispers, still saw doors close, metaphorically, if not literally, when they walked through the village center. But they had a home now. All 7 of them. They had work that mattered. They had each other. And in the village edge of Millbrook, in a house that used to leak in 4 places and now leaked in 0 places, 7 people who weren't supposed to be family proved that the world's rules about belonging were more like suggestions. Because in the end, the bravest thing anyone can do isn't facing enemies or fighting wars or proving strength. It's opening your door when you have nothing to give except the choice to be kind. It's walking away from everything you know to become something better than what you were told to be. It's fixing roofs for people who can't pay because payment isn't always measured in gold. And sometimes, when you're very lucky, those choices build something stronger than any house. They build home. If this story touched something in you, if you felt the weight of impossible choices or the warmth of unexpected family, leave a comment below. Tell us about a time someone showed you kindness when you had nothing to give back. Or tell us about a time you were the one who chose kindness even when it cost you everything. Because these stories, they're not just entertainment, they're reminders. Reminders that the world doesn't have to be what we were told it was. That families can be built from choice instead of blood. That sometimes the poorest people have the richest hearts. And that even rusty keys that don't open any doors can mean everything. Subscribe for more stories about orcs, humans, and the messy, beautiful reality of choosing to be different than the world expects. Because you know what? The world needs more people willing to answer yes when strangers knock and ask if they can stay.